Hospitals across England have been ordered to be ready to evacuate staff and patients in case buildings containing RAAC concrete start to collapse.
Well, the alarming request was made by NHS bosses in a letter to all 224 health trusts, and it comes after more than 100 schools in England were forced to partially or fully close due to safety concerns. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps joins us now. Good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning. I mean, it's a real worry, isn't it, the number of public buildings that could be affected by this. Hospitals now in the spotlight, and the fear is that patients are at risk because of this. Why won't the government publish a list of the hospitals that are at risk?
Yeah, good morning. Well, look, first of all, I mean, this aerated concrete is something which was used post-war from the 50s, and as more information's become available about it, it would be irresponsible not to act. So I think it's absolutely right that the government's surveying the entire estate across government. And I imagine over time, I'm not close to the hospital issues as opposed to the Ministry of Defence things, for example, but I imagine over time, of course, all the information will be published as soon as it's collated. I think it's probably a good idea to find out exactly what the status is first before publishing information.
So, Mr Shapps, to ask you about the defence estate, we're talking here about military barracks, the accommodation for service people and their families. Your department answered a parliamentary question in April in which you said a survey was underway at that time to make sure that the buildings which you're responsible for were safe. That was in April. Now is September, so that is 6 months on. Has that survey been completed?
Yes, I mean, the estate is vast and very varied, so it does take time to get around it all. I am pleased to confirm that as far as accommodation is concerned, most of the accommodation was built after, not in the era of aerated concrete. And when it comes to service family accommodation, it's extremely unlikely that any of that is affected either. There will be other parts of the estate which will be impacted, but those were, from a safety point of view, my primary concern. And then we'll be able to resolve other things in the course of normal business.
But Charlotte just asked you about the publication of lists, and we know the schools department are publishing a list this week. Yes. You said you couldn't answer for the NHS, but you can answer for defence. If you started a survey in April, that survey is complete, and there are employees of the Defence Department who you're responsible for, and also civilians who may be going into those buildings. Shouldn't your obligation now, yourself as Secretary of State, be to publish the information from your survey so everybody knows which parts of the defence estate do have RAAC in, rather than that being something that you know and you choose to keep private from your employees and civilians?
Sure. You'll appreciate I've only been here for, I think, 5 days, so I will, of course,
I'm asking you a question in principle, though. In principle,
but
if you've got the information, shouldn't you make it public?
Yeah, but I was going to say, Ed, I mean, apart from where there may be any national security issues concerned, then, of course, I'm always in favour of openness on these things, and I'm quite certain we will be publishing our list. There's no reason not to.
So number 10 at Downing Street said yesterday that they were not planning to publish a list of public buildings, whereas you're saying that as Secretary of State for Defence, you can see no reason why you shouldn't publish that information. So it sounds like you're taking a rather more open and enlightened view than 10 Downing Street at the moment.
Well, look, I can't speak for across the whole of the government estate. What I do know is that my primary concern was over the domestic properties, and particularly for service families. And I was pleased to find it's extremely unlikely that aerated concrete is involved there. I will do what I can to make sure that we have that information available, and then, of course, we're able to act on it. I have to say it, I've only just got here. I haven't looked at publishing schedules and the like, but you know, I think it's in everyone's interest to get to the bottom of this issue. It's just like in the schools issue. You know, we know that there are over 22,000 schools and colleges in this country, and we know now that about 104 out of those 22,000 are affected. Well, I think it is useful to be able to know where those... I'm just saying, though,
Mr Shapps, you made a very, very clear statement there, which I totally respect, whereas you said that you can see no reason, if you've got the information, you shouldn't make that public. You've got to be conscious of security issues. If that is your principal view, which I agree with, surely you should say to the Secretary of State for Health, which is the guy in charge of hospitals, he should take the same approach as you. There's no reason why the NHS should have a different view from the Defence Department.
Look, I think in each department there will be different considerations taken into account. I mean, with, for example, hospitals, you don't want to cause undue concern, perhaps to patients or loved ones, about something where all the answers may not be known. Similarly, in schools, we have now been able to narrow down that list, and I explained my position with the MOD estate. My view is always towards, tends towards openness, but in my case, there may be some national security implications. So, I mean, each department will need to look through their list. I think actually, if you don't mind me saying, I think the main thing is, I do not want to see anyone's lives put at any kind of risk. In the case of schools, children, the teachers. In the case of MOD, the staff, the service personnel, their families. And I think it's very important that we act, as quickly as we possibly can to resolve this. These issues, go back to the 50s, by the way. This is not
so we have known about this. There's an issue, isn't there, for how long this has been known about. Warnings were made, lack of action and lack of transparency. There has been a failure within government for tackling this in a timely manner and actually being honest with people about what the risk is and what buildings are at risk. And I think that's a lot of people will be thinking, well, why aren't you able to give us more information and why hasn't more been done about it?
Well, look, I'm not a structural engineer, but I do understand that over the summer, particularly when it comes to schools, that more evidence and information became available that wasn't previously available, and also that structural engineers are looking at how aerated concrete acts over a period of time as well. And I think as soon as you have that information, it is important to act. I think another way of doing this would not have been to take immediate action based on the latest data, and I think that would have been wrong. I think even with this inconvenience, I think it's much better to take action and protect children and their staff in the case of schools, and the same across the rest of the estate once you know about these things.
Can I just take you back to this will be a bit hard for you to remember because I think you've had 5 different jobs in the last year, but actually last summer you were a candidate in the Conservative leadership race and you talked about defence spending and you said defence spending must be raised to 3%. You said, freedom is not free. I will raise defence spending to 3% of GDP in contrast to the NATO-recommended minimum of 2%. Now, the government's position is, over time, when they can afford it, to only raise defence spending to 2.5%. Are you happy with that? Is the world a safer place now than it was a year ago when you were running for the Tory leadership? And therefore, are you content to downgrade? Because you did say it must be raised to 3%.
Yes, and I was saying that was over a period of time, but nonetheless, I do believe that the defence budget needs to rise, and so does the government, and that's why we've set the 2.5% as being the goal as funds allow, and I think that is a useful move in the right direction. Now, you'll notice I didn't win that leadership election, so the policy is the one.
Did you not win it because you were over-promising on defence?
Who knows? But what I do know is that at £53 billion, our defence budget is the biggest in Western Europe, and we have global reach and a huge number of brilliant Army, Navy and Air personnel who do this country great service. You can't do that without the budget in place, and that's why the longer-term goal of the government is to raise the budget. But we already, in terms of NATO, we already do well with our budgets. There are many, many NATO countries who are not reaching even the 2% budget.
OK. But something else, when you talk about budgets, we know that supporting people deemed too sick to work is costing the taxpayer £26 billion this year alone. There's this back-to-work drive that's being launched, to enable those who are long-term sick to get back into work, suggestions that they could be working from home to do this, but it's been shelved until 2025. Why is this, that this has been pushed down till after the election? Why aren't we seeing more urgent action on this if it's such a big issue?
Well, first of all, on the principle of it, because the other criticism I've seen this morning is that we should be doing it at all. I really think that actually the world of work has changed a great deal since this was last looked at, I think more than a decade ago, and I think it's absolutely right to provide that support to help people get back into work. Having said that, I think you've got to do it in the right way. In other words, have the resources available, often the one-to-one coaching and the rest of it available to be able to put that programme in place. So I'm quite sure that the Work and Pensions Secretary is looking at this and saying, I'm going to put a programme in place that has the proper support and wraparound to help people get back into those jobs. And I think that's important. It's the right way to do it. I was going to say, I've seen a lot of commentary that somehow we should be leaving those people out of work, and I don't agree with that at all. I think it's absolutely right that we're following this approach.
Grant Shapps, will you publish your list of defence buildings this week?
I'm afraid, Ed, I don't want to give you sort of false promise. I don't know yet because I haven't got into that level of detail.
Week? End of next week?
Well, I hope.
End of next week?
I see what you're doing here, but I don't know. But no doubt I'll be back on your programme when I do.
You promised to publish it.
I was going to say the most important thing is to keep our people safe, and that is where my priority will be. I will try to make sure the information is as available as possible, but the priority is making sure that we actually know.
We'll ask you in a week's time, Mr. Shapps. Thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme.
Thank you.
Much appreciated.